welcome to our conversation today with the Climate Engagement Advisory Council. My name is Vien Truong. I've been a climate justice advocate and policy wonk for over a decade. I grew up in Oakland, California, one of the poorest and most polluted communities in our country, and have spent my life really fighting for solutions to poverty and pollution. And since July, I've been part of supporting the Biden for President Climate Engagement Advisory Council. I am so excited to introduce them to you. Our esteemed panel and council have been supporting the Biden-Harris plan. They include 6 national leaders on climate issues whose expertise intersects the issues of clean energy, climate and environment, and complementary in different ways. They include activist and philanthropist and my friend Tom Steyer, founder of Next Gen America. President of IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, President Lonnie Stephenson. Includes Congresswoman Debbie Haaland, Chair of the House Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. It includes 2 national environmental justice leaders, Dr. Cecilia Martinez, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy in Minnesota, and former South Carolina State Representative Harold Mitchell. He's the founder as well of the Regenesis Project in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And of course, a woman who was both the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency for the United States, the director of the White House Office of Energy and Climate Policy, and who currently serves as the board chair of the League of Conservation Voters, Carol Browner. I'm so excited that you're going to meet them and talk with them today. First, I want to bring in Tom to share some words with you at the top of the hour.
Good morning. I wanted to say that unfortunately, my friend Harold Mitchell cannot be with us today. He has been battling the COVID virus, and we were hoping that his recovery was far along for him to participate. But he sent me a text this morning saying, my recovery seems to have hit a hurdle. Sorry, I'm missing this tremendous opportunity to be with such a great team today. And let me say that what Vien said is an understatement of the accomplishments and leadership that former Representative Mitchell has shown. The Regenesis Project is one of the most outstanding environmental justice projects in the United States of America. Harold is really the mastermind behind it. He has done an amazing job. His family suffered personally, and several of them died based on toxins from factories in their neighborhood. And Harold's been a leader on this for his entire life, literally. So I'm terribly sorry that Harold won't be here because he is an inspiring and honestly a terribly funny person. So I'm sorry he won't be with us today. We'll try and do our best without him, but we miss him and we wish him a very fast recovery.
Thank you, Tom. And next we have a video special greeting for our next Vice President, Senator Kamala Harris.
Hi, everyone. It's Kamala Harris. First, I want to say thank you to the Biden for President Climate Engagement Advisory Council for all the work you have done. The makeup of this council is a testament to the historic and broad-based support for our plan to build a clean energy economy. Joe has put together the most ambitious plan to tackle climate change, earning widespread union support. And our plan has taken bold steps to reverse years of environmental injustice at its core. When we build back better, we invest in creating clean energy jobs, upgrade our infrastructure and commercial buildings, and invest in affordable housing that our communities so desperately need. So I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I am looking forward to working together over the next 2 months to November 3rd and beyond. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Senator Harris. Let's dive into it. Let's dive into the conversation. We've been hearing a lot about the Build Back Better plan, but what exactly is it? To kick us off, let's welcome President Stephenson. President Stephenson, you represent roughly 750,000 members and retirees across the country and in Canada. All of them are energy workers or retired from it. And that's a lot of people. For context, Exxon employs roughly about 70,000 people right now. So you're responsible for more energy workers and their well-being than any other leader in this country. And while clean energy workers are a growing portion of your membership, you also represent workers responsible for how we have been getting our power. So would love to hear from you why you're supportive of Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan.
Thank you, Vien. And I can't tell you how excited I am to be part of the Climate Engagement Advisory Council that Vice President Biden had put together, and all the co-workers in there. I am very proud of the membership that we represent, our 775,000 actually active and retired members across the United States and Canada. And I do want to give a shout out to, I know there's probably several hundred IBEW brothers and sisters that's watching this presentation. So I want to thank you all for being part of this as well. And just about every branch that we represent is tied to energy in one way or another. And so that's why this is so important to us. And we recognize that as we continue to transform our country into zero carbon emissions and clean energy, and it's going to be a lot of moving parts and a lot of opportunities along the way. And we know that we're in a position, the IBEW and other building trades unions as well, and other unions outside of that, to have training programs in place to start getting our members trained as the new technologies come out. The new sources of energy are coming out, that we have the workforce that's trained and willing to do the installations all across the country. And the part of the plan, of course, that that Vice President Biden has laid out creates so many millions of jobs actually in the energy industry, and including the rail, changing the rail system, high-speed rail, and moving that to electrification as well. The rail system, we have railroad members. Manufacturing, we have members that work in manufacturing. We're ready to step up and start manufacturing a lot of these new products as they're going to be put together and move forward with the country. As we transform into the vehicles, if we start seeing more electric vehicles, we need to have an infrastructure across the country to have charging stations all across the country. And Vice President Biden's plan calls to put in 500,000 charging stations all across the country. And of course, with part of the Build Back Better and the energy is to upgrade existing buildings, going in and do retrofit to bring buildings that aren't up to today's energy standards, to go in and retrofit those buildings and bring them up to the current standard, not only for commercial buildings, but also residential as well. And as part of the infrastructure, changing upgrading the water system. We know that there's a huge need to upgrade the water supply across this country. And I know my brothers and sisters in the UA are ready to come in and be able to assist in doing that. And so there's so many things going. It's really exciting. And we're happy to be part of it, because as this transition starts, Vice President Biden is also recognizing the need, as we transform our energy, the way we produce energy today is going to change. And we're gradually, as we have some members that's working in coal right now and fossil, those jobs, while we think under, carbon capture sequestration, there may be opportunities to still have opportunities in the coal, but we also know that we're going to be transforming into more of the renewables. And so we're ready to do that. We're ready to assist the Vice President in any way that we can to move this plan forward.
So excited, because I just get giddy to think about the vision for this country to have clean cars, clean energy, clean water and air, and the million of good labor jobs that will be created from it. And welcome to our labor brothers and sisters who are joining us today. I want to bring in Tom to this conversation. Tom, your experience as the chair of California's Business and Recovery Task Force must have shaped your thinking about what we need to do now for this economic catastrophe. Can you share a little bit of your insight with us today?
Thanks, Vien. And I want to just put a little background to what Lonnie Stephenson was saying, because let's put it in the condition the United States is in right now. I mean, we're in the middle of the biggest pandemic any of us have seen, with a very sharp economic slowdown associated with that. Unemployment is more than doubled in the country, where we're confronting systemic racism across the country. and where we have a climate crisis. We've seen in the last couple of weeks, historic levels of fires across the West. We've seen historic numbers of hurricanes in the Gulf. We are now all 50 states living our climate crisis. That is the situation under which Vice President Biden will become President Biden. And it's why his plan that Lonnie was describing is so relevant to voters and to people across the United States. So let's think about it for 1 second. As Lonnie said, we're basically going to rebuild the United States of America in a clean, green way. $2 trillion of federal spending in the first 4 years, creating literally millions of good paying middle-class union jobs across this country, doing all the things that Lonnie was saying, rebuilding buildings, weatherizing houses, rail systems, charging stations, and new manufacturing. Because what this system does is it puts the framework in for a new private sector explosion of investment in new technologies and growth across this country. And at a time when unemployment is, at extreme levels where we need these jobs, what we see as a reaction, a necessary, active reaction, aggressive reaction to a climate crisis is also a comprehensive jobs program. It should be speaking to everyone in America who understands how big this unemployment hole is and the need for the government to step up and fill it so that private enterprise can follow on behind. That's the first point. Secondly, as I said, we're confronting systemic racism in this country. And that includes concentrating our toxins, concentrating our air and water pollution in underserved, overwhelmingly Black and brown communities. That's what Harold Mitchell, really his life has been dedicated to working on. This is a plan which reacts to that, which specifically addresses those problems in it. So when we think about what's actually going on the ground in the United States for every person in this country, for voters across this country, this speaks to their need, to their families' need in terms of jobs, in terms of safety and health, air and water pollution, but also in terms of resolving a crisis that threatens to engulf us all. So really, this is, to me, an incredibly powerful statement from Vice President Biden, which I know from talking to him is true, that he gets it. He gets the science. He understands what we have to do to overcome this. He's versed in the technology, but much more than that. He's somebody who leads with his heart. And you can see this plan reacts to a kid with asthma. It reacts to someone who needs work, who needs to support his or her family in dignity. Those are things that Joe Biden gets in his very core. I mean, we all saw this week a poll out saying that climate is the #1 issue for Democratic voters. And here is a plan that addresses those needs in the most human way, in the most deeply relevant way, both our immediate needs, also with a vision for the future. So I look at this, Vien, and I think that Lonnie Stephenson said it really well. This really addresses the needs of voting Americans and working Americans and everybody in this country in a very comprehensive, thoughtful way. And I know it's a priority. So I'm super excited about what the Vice President has done here.
I am too. And really for me, growing up in Oakland, growing up in one of the most polluted communities in this country, I just get really excited to hear about this plan to build up the economy and really to advance good paying jobs and rebuild the middle class. It's just so important, especially in urban and impoverished communities right now. President Stephen, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this question I get asked in the community all the time, which is, some folks are skeptical. They're saying, it sounds good. We hear a lot of rhetoric from politicians, but how do we really know this is going to be a priority? President Stephenson, can you help us address some of that?
Sure. I think, again, Vice President Biden has laid his plan is really laid out, and he just didn't throw something out there. There's a lot of thought. And I'm happy to say that we have been at the table and worked very closely with the vice president in putting together his plan. And it was important that he wanted to have labor's voice and hear some of our concerns as we do the transition. But we are, and everything he's got in his plan, and Tom touched on it, talks about, you know, these jobs are going to be created, these new jobs that's going to come out of this as we transform into more, you know, renewables and clean energy. They're going to be good paying union jobs. And the vice president supports everybody's right to join a union of their choice. And so it's going to create opportunities for us to provide folks, you know, people that have been left behind in many ways, you know, women and people of color, the opportunity to join the IBEW and our other labor unions as well, and the building trades. I know everybody's got the same initiative to get more women and people of color in our trades. And so it's going to provide economic opportunities for many people and lifting the middle class all across this country.
So exciting. We're getting comments from folks who are excited to see you both together on screen. You are leaders in building up the economy and creating jobs and really advancing and defending the underdogs, right? And so would love for you guys to talk a little bit about how you guys have enjoyed working together. And folks feel like you guys have rapport. What's that about?
Well, let me say this. Everything I've ever done in energy, clean energy, the environment, climate, which has gone on politically for more than a decade, I have done in conjunction with organized labor leaders. I believe that in California, together, we've worked on propositions that have passed that will create more than 500,000 union jobs in our state. And it's always been critical to me. And this is something that I know Joe Biden has in his absolute bones, that this work for the working people, that we recognize the dignity and the responsibility of working people across this country to provide for their families. And that's really what the IBEW stands for, is to let people have the dignity of work where they have a middle-class existence, provide proudly for their families, take the responsibility, do work that is absolutely productive and skilled, and make this. That's really been the heart of America for a long time. And as Lonnie Stephenson said, people have been kept out of that. And this is a plan which in multiple ways tries to reach out to people who've been left behind, pull them into that middle class, give them those opportunities in a broad way. And if you know Joe Biden, look, what President Stephenson was talking about is at the heart of who Joe Biden is, caring about those people from a health standpoint, caring about those people in terms of their ability to succeed in terms of jobs and employment. And so working with people like Lonnie Stephenson, for me, is an incredible honor, because they put their whole life into trying to organize a society where working people get decently paid, have decent benefits, and get respect. And that's something we have to get back into America. And, you know, people like Lonnie Stephenson are at the forefront of pushing for that and have been for decades.
Yes, and just real quick, and I'll be short. I just do want to say that, you know, since when I first met Tom, of course, virtually when we got on this council together, you know, I called him Mr. Steyer, and he immediately says, "Please call me Tom." And so I knew we were going to hit it off, because he was just like me. I preferred to be called Lonnie, really, you know, and I tell my members that as well. And so we've got a lot in common. I think we both, over conversations over these last several months now, have been able to learn from one another. And, you know, and he's been able to understand our perspective and some of the things that we see moving forward, and trying to have the transition of the jobs that are out there, that there's, you know, continues to be good paying jobs into the future for people in particularly in the energy industry and others, and providing good, you know, like I said, the opportunity for manufacturing to grow in this country is very exciting. So Tom, I thank you for your friendship, and we look forward to continue to work with you to get this done.
Me too, Lonnie. Thanks.
I thank you both, President Stephenson, Lonnie, Tom, thank you both so much. And now I want to turn to, you know, we talked a little bit about the future. We talked about building up a new America. I want to talk a little bit about how do we make sure we leave no one behind. And here, no one better to talk about this than Dr. Cecilia Martinez, who is a hero in the environmental justice community. Whenever her name comes up, the entire conversation really stops and everybody talks about how wonderful she is. So I'm just jazzed you guys are going to get to meet her. And I would love for her to help introduce us to the question of how do we make sure we leave no one behind in this future that we're building? How do we make sure we really address environmental justice? And what is environmental justice? So Dr. Martinez, we can have you come on.
Thank you, Van, and thank you, Tom and Lonnie, for all the words that you shared earlier. I just want to say, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that once again today we're in a really difficult time in this country, which intersects the racial justice, economic justice, criminal justice, and environmental justice are all intersected. And as we're seeing as of late, we can see the manifestations of how they are intersected. So I just like to send my thoughts and prayers to folks out in the community who are struggling right now with the decisions, the most recent decisions. But let me say environmental justice is that. It is a movement that was birthed out of the need to make sure that all communities have a healthy and safe environment, and that all those communities have a healthy and safe environment where they work, where they live, where they learn, where they play, and where they pray. And you can see that that is about as comprehensive and holistic as it can be, because we all know that a healthy and safe environment is part of our everyday life. It just doesn't happen where you live. You can go to work and you can be unsafe, and you can bring that home to your families and your communities. Where you pray, many of us and many indigenous communities are very tied to nature and its sustainability, and believe truly in the health of the earth as a fundamental part of our responsibility. And so praying is not only in the churches and in the synagogues, which are incredibly important, but nature is a fundamental part of all that we do in our spirituality as well as peoples. So EJ as a movement began as a way to try and ensure that no community was left behind by our environmental laws and policies, and that no community was left behind by our advocacy organizations as well. That, you know, national environmentalism needed to be inclusive, that it needed to address all the systemic ways in which racism and economic classism operates to create an unhealthy environment. So I think it's really great and wonderful that we are at this time where we can start to think about a better way of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you started off saying a little bit about environmental justice is about creating safe and healthy communities. You know, we were expecting and hoping that Representative Mitchell can join us, but he can't because he's recovering from COVID, which we know has a lot of overlap to environmental justice issues, to racism issues. Can you say a little bit about the overlap between these things?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, we have seen this from the movement of that has brought forward all of these issues were very invisible and have been invisible sort of underneath the surface. But if you're living the reality, we know that it's very clear and visible. So the fact that you have communities that have been overburdened by pollution, have been overburdened by being the sites of where the most toxic and pollution is being cited, that contributes to the public health, that contributes to where they stand. We know in public health research, time and time and time again, the issue of your zip code matters. Where you live matters, both for your public health, for the health of your family, as well as for your community. And so when we have these stressors, whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's climate impacts, from all different ways, whether it's hurricanes, droughts, vector-borne diseases, air quality, all the myriad of issues that climate change brings, these are just exacerbating the underlying conditions that of inequality. And so we can see that, you know, if we don't address them systemically, if we don't see those interconnections, if we don't bring that to the forefront, we are going to continue to reinforce the kind of inequalities that we've seen before. That's not in the vice president's plan. The vice president's plan is to overcome and to deal with those systemic issues, which is why this is, I feel, a very important moment in our history.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I want to dig into a little bit of the substance, but before I do, I noticed that you didn't mention in your introduction of yourself that you're Time 100 most influential people in the world right now because of your work on climate justice and climate change. But I'm not too humble to tell people you're amazing. And that this isn't just about an election issue. This isn't a campaign issue. This is your life work. Uh, can you tell us a little bit about why this Biden-Harris plan for environment and justice is significant to you?
Absolutely. Look, many of us, and I thank you for that, but that honor is actually a symbol of the many, many people who have been working really hard on this issue for a long time. Many who are much older than I am and who have been in this fight for a long time. So I want to acknowledge that to start with. But what this plan acknowledges and says is, if many of you know that the executive order for environmental justice was signed into being by President Bill Clinton in 1994. It's over 25 years old, and it has some very good things in it. It was the place where environmental justice started in the federal family. But it has not moved a lot since then. It hasn't been changed. It hasn't been modified. It hasn't been modernized to deal with the issues that we're dealing with today. And so one of the incredible things that the Biden-Harris plan does too is it seeks to take an all-government approach so that every cabinet is focused on environmental justice. And the work is led from the West Wing. So the very first thing that we saw as an environmental justice community is elevating environmental justice up the federal family ladder to be located in the White House, where really strong leadership on how to deal with these problems can happen. A second approach that this Biden-Harris plan has is one of inclusion. It is about making sure that all of our communities are heard at the table. And I want to take a moment just to stress this. I want to say that, behind the scenes, no press, no cameras, no public, no public. The vice president and his team at the highest levels have been having listening session with environmental justice community across the country, whether it's in New Jersey, the Gulf Coast, whether it's in South Carolina, where Representative Harold Mitchell led some efforts, the Southwest, the West Coast, and then in Michigan, we have had listening sessions with EJ community and EJ leaders. And one of the things that the vice president said in one of those listening sessions that he was actually participating in was, he told our folks, look, I am not here to get your vote, although I would love that. I am here to hear from you on how to govern better. What are your ideas? What can we do to make sure that we solve these problems? That was huge because it showed the sincerity of what the Biden-Harris plan is all about, that it is about trying to address the issues that our communities. And I can tell you the range of ideas that came from and are coming from those listening sessions are being made into the Biden-Harris plan. We see the reality of the listening, and that is remarkable and huge. And it shows our communities that this is a sincere effort by the administration or by the vice president. Getting ahead
Soon
of my
to be administration.
Yes.
We're all here for that. We're all here for that. Yes. Well, you said something that I want to tease out a bit. You said the word inclusion, making sure that all our communities are at the table, and that he's been listening and bringing the table really to the community and making sure that those voices are incorporated into his plan. I want to note that not only is he seeming to incorporate it into his plan, environmental justice, which is oftentimes an afterthought, seen as a separate issue, but the Biden-Harris EJ plan is actually part of their Build Back Better plan, which is quite significant. Can you say a little bit about what that means and why that's important for everybody?
Sure. So I think the main tenets of the plan, which we are really excited about, is obviously using that inclusive and empowering all government approach, which the example of lifting up the environmental justice into the White House and making sure that it's inclusive of all agencies is a component of. That's a really wonderful and effective tool that EJ communities have been advocating for. Another element of the plan, which is critically important, which we have never seen before, is that he has acknowledged and said our communities have been disinvested in over history. And what we need to do is we need to target 40% of the federal government's investment and benefits in a clean energy revolution that targets our disadvantaged communities. This is not a giveaway. This is not charity. We all know that there has been capital disinvestment in many of these communities. So this is an effort to try and bring capital back in a way that can build up community infrastructure, can build up housing, can build up transportation in ways that are modern, environmentally sustainable, but above all, equitable and just. And then the last piece of the plan is to overhaul the civil rights efforts. There is a particular issue in this country around communities who have faced systemic racism and environmental policy being able to get remedy for it, being able to even work towards remedy. And so one of his commitments is to actually do that, to ensure that the federal family and the EPA are honoring both the spirit and the legal pieces of Title VI, which will ensure that our communities have all the legal protections that every other community has when dealing with these issues.
Thank you so much. You know, you touched on something that I wanted to ask you as a closing question around the listening sessions, around how he's been, you know, really working with community and incorporating that. It's a curveball, but if you can be along with me, can you say a little bit about why you're excited about the Intergovernmental Council that he's going to convene around environmental justice, and what that means in terms of what his administration will even look like moving forward on EJ?
Right. Well, I think, you know, again, that there has been an intergovernmental agency on environmental justice, and it has been convened through the Environmental Protection Agency. And there has been a community advisory committee called the National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, also convened through EPA. But what this will do is it will really lift up the power and the breadth of those two bodies to make sure that all issues related to environmental justice are coordinated across all of the agencies. And, you know, he's talking, the plan also includes not just that the offices and the units will be elevated, but that government itself will be more inclusive. You can see that even in his campaign, where it is much more inclusive than other campaigns, where he is bringing in people from all walks of life, racial diversity, economic diversity, to help influence how he moves forward. I just want to take a quick minute to just sort of do a background to that question, Vien, because I think, you know, in Indigenous communities, I have learned that leadership is not positional. Leadership is earned. Leadership is gained by example, by your actions. And a leader is not a leader if he or she does not have anyone to follow or be alongside them. And sometimes we need leaders who are warriors. Sometimes we need leaders who are healers. Sometimes we need leaders who are spiritual in nature. Right now, we need all of those. And I think what is really critical and what I've seen about the vice president is that he has listened to the community so that he can bring all of those elements into the next administration. We are going to need all of it. There is no doubt about it. We are at a critical time, and we need people to get out there and vote and be able to lift up our country to meet its highest ideals.
I love it. I love it. Well, President Stephenson and Tom had talked about building a future that is clean and sustainable and builds up the middle class. Dr. Martinez, thank you for sharing the vision for making sure no one is left behind, and that we have an administration in the Biden-Harris administration that'll be inclusive and that will have the voices of people who are helping to shape this country. I want to bring in former EPA Administrator Carol Browner. We we were anticipating Representative Holland to join and talk about public lands. We'll circle back. She's on the floor fighting for our work, fighting for renewable research and development and deployment right now. She'll share hopefully some things about that when she comes back. But first, let's go to Carol Browner, former administrator of EPA and director of White House Energy and Climate Change and Policy and board chair of the League of Conservation Voters. And Carol, I'm just gonna step back and let you have at it to talk a little bit about why this all matters.
Thank you, Vien. And I just want to start by thanking all the people who are part of this advisory board. And to Tom, to Lonnie, to Cecilia, thank you for what you have said. And for those of you listening in, these are the voices that Joe Biden asked to join him on this climate journey. And I think it's really important. Some of them aren't here with us today, Harold, obviously, but these are people who have thought about these issues, who have been leaders on these issues, and leaders on issues that need to be part of the climate discussion. So I am so impressed by the commitment and the breadth of knowledge that comes to this. And Vien, thank you for organizing us and keeping us focused. You know, we've talked about jobs, we've talked about the different sectors. There's so much opportunity when we think about what we need to address the climate challenge. It is important for us all to remember just how real it is, how high the stakes are. You know, many of us have worked on this issue 20, 30 years, and the scientists tell us we have very few years left. So as Cecilia just said, we sort of need all tools on the table. We need to be thinking in all ways about what we can do to address the climate challenge. Cecilia, I want to particularly thank you for raising the issue of climate and environmental justice. I was recently, like probably many, watching the CNN documentary about the great John Lewis. And the very last picture is a picture of President Clinton actually signing the environmental justice executive order, which I was then at EPA, and we spearheaded the whole effort to make that happen. And I was standing in the photo along with John Lewis, and that's why the photo was there. And as I'm watching it, I'm proud of the work we did. And then I think, and it didn't continue. And we didn't make the kind of progress we needed to make, the kind of progress that Cecilia talked about. How do you use Title VI? How do you really bring to these communities who are disproportionately impacted by the pollution burdens solutions, real solutions? And so when you look at Vice President Biden's plan, you know, his commitment to these communities, I think, is absolutely essential and really speaks to his commitment to the climate agenda more broadly. Lonnie, I want to, you and Tom, your conversation about jobs and the opportunities here. Thank you. There are so many jobs that we can create. And as we think about how Vice President Biden will want to invest in the green technologies, the green solutions. You know, Vien mentioned I was part of the Obama administration. We secured the largest investment through the Recovery Act in green technology ever. And it did make a difference, but we left a lot on the table. There is a lot more to do. And Tom, you have just been there forever. You have been there raising your voice. And I'm a native Floridian. I actually come from Miami, where right now we are experiencing the king tide. It means that it is flooding in streets of Miami when it is not raining. This is climate related. And Tom, you've been a great friend to the state of Florida, but a great friend to the environmental movement and the whole cause. And so I thank you for that. You know, as we look out over the next, what do we have, 40 some days? I try not to think because it feels overwhelming at times. The most important thing all of us can do is make sure that all of the people we know understand just how critical this election is and how critical the climate issue is, because you know, we need as a movement, and I've been a diehard environmentalist and part of the environmental movement since my early 20s. We need to show to the Congress, the House, the Senate, that there really is a conservation movement out there, that there are lots of people, not your typical environmentalists, whether it's people of color, whether it's unions, all of these people coming to this agenda, coming to the Biden agenda, the climate agenda, the Build Back Better. And so we need a landslide. And that will say more to people than probably anything any of us can say as we talk about how important these issues are. So again, it's just an honor, Vien, to be a part of this group. And, it's interesting. I probably, like many of you, every single presidential election since I was a teenager, I have gone door to door for my candidate. We can't go door to door this year. We can't. There are nobody opening doors, obviously, in the time of COVID, a frightening time. But we can get on the phone and we can call. And so, as one of my board members likes to say to me, make sure you leave it all on the field this time. There's no waking up the day after the election thinking, darn, I wish I had just done a little bit more. So again, thank you all. And it's just an honor to be a part of the group.
It's our honor to have you, Administrator Browner. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to bring in Congresswoman Holland, who just got back, and she's been leading the work to substantially increase funding for renewable energy, R&D, and deployment. So we're so grateful that she's got a bit of time for us today to help share why she sees this as a really important work and how she sees this as different from the work that she's been doing with the Obama-Biden administration, and the difference with that and Trump in terms of public lands.
Thank you, Vien. So good to be with you all, as always. And yes, our public lands, so important. Over the last 4 years, fossil fuel lobbyists have essentially taken over the federal agencies that manage our public lands and implement environmental laws to pursue an energy dominance agenda that has run roughshod over environmental protections and pillaged our cherished sacred places. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, on the other hand, are committed to protecting our public lands and making them part of the climate solution. They have proposed banning new oil and gas permitting on public lands and waters, modifying royalties to account for climate costs, and requiring aggressive methane pollution limits for new and existing oil and gas operations. That's exactly what we need. They are promoting natural climate solutions like reforestation, climate-friendly farming to improving soil health, and coastal wetland restoration that I have legislation on as well. So I'm super excited that we'll be able to move forward in these areas as a country under their leadership. They'll permanently protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and so many other areas impacted by President Trump's attacks on federal lands and waters, and establish national parks and monuments that reflect America's natural heritage. This means protecting sites like Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante, which were home to the Pueblo people, my ancestors. And it means making sure that we tell the whole story of our country in our parks and monuments, and that we make sure everyone is welcome at these special places. Joe Biden has committed that on day one, he'll begin the process of protecting biodiversity, slowing extinction rates, and helping leverage natural climate solutions by conserving 30% of America's lands and waters by 2030. That sounds amazing to me. And look, that includes federal public lands along with lands owned by states, local governments, tribes, and private landowners. It's a cooperative effort that will take place across our country to protect important habitat for species that are seeking refuge from climate change. And it will also build climate resiliency and soak up carbon dioxide from our atmosphere. That's something that folks are working on around the world. And so the Biden-Harris commitment to conserving 30 by 30 is a way the United States can show international environmental leadership, which is missing currently, and help rebuild our relationships around the globe. It's also a way that the Biden administration will be able to connect with Indigenous peoples in the US and around the world on how to most effectively conserve land and water and fully respect the rights of Indigenous people. Many of the folks who live in environmental justice communities who have borne the brunt of pollution over the many decades, they don't even have access to the outdoors. They live in areas without parks, and they don't have transportation to get to any parks or outdoor areas because they don't own cars and there aren't enough public transportation options. There's so many folks in rural communities who are in that situation. Under President Biden and Vice President Harris, We will once again be a country committed to protecting our planet, and we will empower communities to have a say in the way we manage our public lands to ensure that they're accessible and welcoming to everyone. That also means making sure that people from all walks of life have opportunities to be involved in the outdoor economy and the restoration economy so that they can benefit and so that their perspectives are not just represented, but are integral parts of the way our nation operates. Joe and Kamala have also proposed establishing a civilian climate corps focused on conservation and resilience. This will put people to work immediately, restoring wetlands, planting trees, improving the condition of our public lands, and it will give kids growing up in the city opportunities to gain work experience and appreciation of the outdoors. Other elements of their plan will also benefit our public lands. Their commitment to cleaning up and redeveloping abandoned and underused brownfield properties, power plants, landfills, and other idle community assets will reduce the pressure to expand development into pristine areas. Their plan to preserve and implement the existing Clean Air Act will ensure that visitors to our national parks, which Ken Burns referred to as America's best idea in the title of his film, will experience clear skies and fresh air. And their commitment to design zoning and building codes that are resilient to climate change will mean less development on fragile coastal lands that are essential habitat for fish and wildlife, as well as protecting communities from flooding. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris know there is no greater challenge facing our country, our world, than climate change. And they are committed to making our public lands and waters part of the solution to that challenge, which is good news for people, good news for wildlife and plant life, and good news for our planet. And it is a welcome change from what we've had for the last nearly 4 years, Vien.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You talked a little bit about the urgency of the moment. And of course, I'm here in the West Coast now where we've been ravaged with the wildfires up and down the coast. And I know this is something that the vice president has spoken to. I know something Senator Harris has talked about from the state of California. Can you say a little bit about why that matters so much and his ideas for how we can address that with the Climate Corps?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, there's no denying that the fires, I mean, everything that's been happening, you know, I'm sure everyone's been talking about things that have been happening, not just in the United States, but around the world, flooding, fires, I mean, you name it. Absolutely, we need to make sure that we involve everybody in the restoration of this newfound climate protection that we will see with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Absolutely.
Yay. With that, I want to bring our full panel back onto the screen. We're talking about the urgency of the moment. We're talking about why this issue really matters. And I mean, gosh, I know you guys are all very busy. Congresswoman Holland, you literally just came back after juggling a million things and helping us advance funding for renewable energy. We're taking this time here today, and I just want to maybe hand it to Tom for a minute to say, why is this moment so important? And what do we need to do now?
Well, let me start, Vien, by just saying that I'm glad everybody got a chance to see how inspirational and dedicated and wise the people that I get a privilege to be on this council with really are. I'm very sorry Harold Mitchell wasn't with us today because he is just that kind of person too. But if you listen to this series of people, they have been inspirational for Vien and me. And they are really leaders across this country and across this world in so many different ways in terms of reaching out with a policy to make people's lives better. And it's very much a reflection of Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris in terms of the values that are pushing the people who you heard this morning to act and to dedicate their lives. I want to secondly say, I want to make sure I get this in before we leave, Vien, that if you're watching, please text EARTH, EARTH, EARTH to 30330 to show that you are, in fact, a dedicated climate voter. I mean, we are in a sprint. Carol Browner put it really, really well, as always. But we have 40 days to the election. Ballots are already dropping around the country. People are already waiting in line to vote because they know it's so important. So we have 40 days until November 3rd. And then the UN says we have 9 years from Inauguration Day to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. So we are in an absolute sprint to make sure that we elect Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris, an absolute sprint with absolutely no choice. And to be real for 1 second, this is the Climate Engagement Advisory Council. This is about reaching out and making sure that people understand how important it is, which is exactly what all of these outstanding leaders have been talking about this morning, and how important it is, and how important it is to translate that into a vote. I promise you, the people on this council who you heard from, including Harold Mitchell, who's in his sickbed, will do every single thing they can to make sure that we elect Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris between now and November 3rd, every single thing. And I'm asking everybody who's watching, please to do the same. Of course, to vote and to make sure that you do it carefully, to make sure your vote is counted, but also to reach out to all of your friends and all of your family, because we need an overwhelming response here. You know, what we've talked about today is just about everything in life. You know, we're talking about employment and the dignity of work. We're talking about health across America, particularly in underserved Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities. We're talking about the future of the planet and innovation, for us not to be passive victims, but for us to join together and stand up for what's right. So that's exactly what today's about, Vien. That's exactly what climate engagement is about. This is an issue where Vice President Biden's plan is fantastic. It's aggressive, it's necessary. And you've heard really outstanding people tell you how much it reaches into the lives of Americans, into everybody watching. So we're really asking, this is about support and action for us all to stand up for what we believe in and move forward.
Yay! That's so right. Everybody text EARTH to 30330 to continue the conversation with us, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.